fashion magazines, a vapid wasteland designed to make women feel bad about their bodies and encourage them to conform to the consumerist agenda of the fashion industry. Right?
Yeah, kind of. These criticisms are absolutely valid. But while fashion magazines can certainly be problematic in some areas, historically, fashion magazines have been incredibly important arenas for women's voices and agency to be heard. They've set the metronome of fashion, controlling the rhythm by which the fashion industry functions. And they have acted as a way of retrospectively keeping track of how fashion has evolved and changed over time. They've provided a space for women writers and entrepreneurs to grow and share their work. And they have promoted making skills alongside consumerism. So what are fashion magazines? Over 500 years, well 400 but 5 centuries, they have evolved massively, and their earliest specimens may not seem very familiar to those used to the glossy pages of Vogue and Marie Claire. But in this video, I'm going to take you on a journey from the printing presses of the early 17th century, through the glittering gold leaf decorated magazines of the Georgians, the frugality of the middle-class Victorian fashion magazine, all the way to the glossy consumer magazines of today. It's a subject that I love and have researched a lot in my academic work, and I've published this book, Disseminating Dress. So if you fancy reading about all of this in much more detail, then check the description below for a link to get your hands on a copy. So, a little precursor, I'm going to talk a lot about fashion plates in this video. These are not trendy porcelain or sartorial crockery. These are the fashion illustrations of the past, and they're called plates simply because of the printing method used to create them. Doris Langley Moore, one of the founding mothers of dress history as a discipline, and whose collection forms the basis of the Bath Fashion Museum, once said that, quote, "The fashion plate has no other raison d'etre than to impart information about the current or the coming mode, and in such a way as to create a favourable climate of opinion for it." So to Moore, the fashion plate was this uncomplicated sartorial ambassador, which prepared a passive public for new fashion. Well, Moore is correct insofar as the fashion plate was an envoy for fashion, but they're far more complicated than that. For a start, a fashion plate cannot tell you how a new style is made, and vitally, early fashion plates were usually published retrospectively, so the fashions are already out of date by the time that they're in a magazine. Instead, they can tell us so much about people of the past, how they thought about fashion, how they thought about time, and their own identities. So it's far more interesting than just fashion marketing. They're really great. Fashion magazines, as we know them, grew out of more general periodicals aimed at women readers. One early example, The Treasure of Hidden Secrets, which is a really great name, was addressed to, quote, "gentlewomen, honest matrons and virtuous virgins." Within its pages, readers could find out how to cure consumption with snails and worms boiled in beer, yum, as well as find recipes for powder to stop moths eating your clothes, and some lovely marmalade recipes. So basically a Stuart-era version of Good Housekeeping. There were lots of very short-lived magazines in this period, like the Ladies' Mercury, which lasted from 1693 until 1693. But it was the first proper periodical for women published in England, so that's good. And lots of other magazines for women followed in the first decades of the 18th century, like the Female Tatler and the Female Spectator. But it wasn't until 1732 that bookseller Edward Cave first used the term magazine. Over in France, the Mercure Galant was publishing some of the first, kind of, maybe, historians disagree about it, fashion plates. And there had been prints of people in fashionable dress published sporadically since the 16th century. But these were retrospective records of what had been worn at a particular time and place. So they're more like an ethnography of fashion than a means of disseminating the latest styles. So were any of these fashion magazines as we know them? No. But they did lay a lot of groundwork for what would happen to these dense, text-heavy, black and white publications as the Georgians got their fashion-hungry hands on them. I might be biased, but the later 18th century is where this gets fun. Fashion plates have become more common as teeny tiny little black and white engravings in pocketbooks, which were essentially the filofax of the Georgians. Why am I comparing a historical thing that nobody uses anymore to another historical thing that nobody uses anymore? Okay, they're like paper diaries with an accounting section. So you have a single fashion plate published in each annual publication, which would have reflected the fashion of the previous year. So it's not exactly cutting edge, up to the minute fashion. These were more of a reminder of your social obligation that women were expected to pay attention to fashion, but alongside the management of their time and money. So they're part of a strategy to manage yourself and your identity as a woman in genteel society. But as fashion and fashion news really heated up in the 1770s, why the 1770s are so important in fashion history might have to be the subject of another video. The appetite for a fashion-specific magazine got stronger. In 1777, the magazine à la mode outlined shortcomings of their pocket-sized competitors, and I quote, "For some years past, annual pocketbooks have pretended to convey an idea of the reigning mode of dress of the current year. The futility of such pretensions must be obvious to everyone who gives himself time to reflect that nothing is more variable than fashions in dress, and that any one mode of dress is so far from being likely to continue a whole year that very probably it may not last a month." Oh, burn. The Ladies' magazine illustrated the point even further, stating that, quote, "If a lady of elevated rank should dress herself in a particular manner, all the rest of the sex would adopt her ton of dress. The contagion commences from those who are familiar with the person who introduces the new mode, after which it communicates itself to their acquaintances or those who behold them. From the city it spreads to the country and foreign parts. The fashion which reaches Amsterdam in 1773 was born and expired in Paris in 1771. And that's really not good enough, is it? But fashion was speeding up, and fashion news was going to set the pace. Following an abortive attempt by the magazine's predecessor of the same name in the 1750s, the Ladies' magazine, which ran from 1770 for an impressive 77 years, kick-started the periodical fashion plate, and by 1800 they were a regular monthly feature. These images were published alongside women's writing, history pieces and other literary and improving works, and were nearly twice the size of the pocketbook prints, but they were still black and white. Through the 1780s and 1790s, the fashion magazine blossomed across Europe, and although they were quite diverse in quality, style and readership, these were watershed publications in the history of the fashion plate and fashion periodical in Europe. Perhaps the swankiest of all was Gallery of Fashion, which started in London in the 1790s. The editor had, quote, "made it his particular study to select those magnificent dresses in which the ladies appear at the routs, the opera, the playhouses and the concert rooms, as well as those elegant morning dresses of Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens." So the magazine was essentially a window into the luxurious lives of London's beau monde. Some of the absolutely gorgeous and individually hand-coloured fashion plates were gilt in gold leaf, and the subscriber list contained some very distinguished names. The editor boasted that, quote, Several ladies of rank and fashion have not only approved of this plan, but they have at the same time granted permission to the publisher to make drawings of their new dresses and to insert them in this gallery. Thus, the credit of the invention of the different dresses will be secured to those fair subscribers who contribute to the embellishment of this work. And they will find the publisher always ready to represent their dresses in that style of elegance and that original taste which is so peculiar to the British ladies. So it's claiming to be a parade of posh girl fashions. But hey, if we believe them, at least it seems like people genuinely wore these garments, which is not something that can be said for all fashion plates. As we move into the 19th century, the tone of these magazines shifts a bit. Instead of offering a glimpse into the lives of the elite, more and more magazines aim to guide the shopping habits of their readers. Two of the big names of the early 19th century magazine world were Belle Assemblée and the Repository of Arts. You've probably seen a lot of their fashion plates floating around Pinterest. Where these two publications most significantly differed was the explicit links that they made between their fashion plates and the consumer choices of their readership. Both magazines snuck in innovative textile marketing strategies so that haberdashers and drapers could directly advertise to their readership. And from 1809, the repository included fabric samples from various London drapers. And aren't they absolutely lovely? Imagine the delight of seeing and feeling fabrics within your fashion magazine, just from the comfort of your own home. Much better than online shopping. The repository even makes really direct links between the fashion plates and the fabric samples in its pages. In January 1809, for example, the gold-coloured velvet, which I have here, was signposted as ideal for the mantle of the morning gown depicted in one of the two fashion plates included in that issue. So this cross-referencing between the exceedingly commercial textile advertising and the fashion sections of the periodical shifts the fashion plate status from being this retrospective sartorial commentator to actually being an active agent getting consumers to buy fashion. By the second half of the 19th century, fashion magazines were everywhere, with a whole range of different titles aimed at both elite and middle-class readers. The English Woman's Domestic magazine, which was a joint project between Samuel Beeton and his wife Isabella, yes, that Mrs. Beeton, promoted a sense of domestic industriousness. This is very much Industrial Revolution productivity vibes, but make it feminine and domestic. Early issues contained both coloured fashion plates as aspirational models and black and white prints associated with diagrams which depicted the required pattern pieces. The middle-class reader of the English Woman's Domestic magazine was well equipped to clothe herself on a budget. By the end of the 19th century, the fashion magazine was a newsagent's staple. From the Delineator, Weldon's, the Young Lady's Journal, to working class magazines like Forget Me Not, there was an endless array of fashion news available. And in 1892, yet another new title hit the market, Vogue. In 1909, Condé Montrose Nast, the founder of Condé Nast Publications, bought Vogue and transformed it into a global phenomenon. Today, each issue of Vogue has over 400 images, and that's a huge transformation from the tiny single black and white images of the 18th century. In fact, in 1932, Vogue was one of the first magazines to print a coloured photo for the cover. But Vogue has incredible political fashion power. Its covers mark the waypoints and landmarks of fashion's biggest political and iconic moments, from Harry Styles to Michelle Obama. It sits at the very heart of the multi-million-dollar industry. And while the fashion industry has many faults, you certainly cannot dismiss Vogue as a frivolous entertainment for vacuous ladies. So if you want to read more, you can get Disseminating Dress from all good booksellers all over the world, as well as directly from Bloomsbury, and I've included some links in the description below. And please do like, subscribe and click the little bell to get a notification when I post more fashion history content like this.